Good evening. I hope all of you are doing well. We're learning Maseches Yevamos daf Lamed Hey. We're about 7 lines down or so on Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, and we'll be learning, depending on how far we get over the course of the next little while, probably toward the bottom of Lamed Hey Amud Beis, and maybe we'll go to the top of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. We'll see when we get there. The Gemara says 7 lines down, another version of what we saw in the name of Shmuel yesterday. And the Gemara says, Lishna Acharina Amrela, 7 lines down, Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. Here's another version of what we learned yesterday. Amar Shmuel, Kulan Tzrichos Lahamtin Shlosha Chodashim. Everybody needs to wait 3 months after ending one relationship. A woman has to wait 3 months after ending one relationship and beginning another. Chutz Migiores, except for a woman who has converted. Umeshuchreres Gedola, and a shifcha who has been freed, who is a gedola. Aval ktana bas Yisrael eina tzricha lahamtin gimel chodashim. But a ktana, who is a Jewish girl, who was married and ended her marriage in one way or another, she does not need to wait 3 months. Now, yesterday, this is different than yesterday's version of Shmuel. Yesterday's version of Shmuel indicated that we have a gzeira derabanan, that a girl who's a Jewish girl who's a ketana who had znus, we do require of her to wait 3 months. This version of Shmuel says differently. Here Shmuel says, Eina tzricha lahamtin gimel chadashim. So the Gemara says, B'mai, what's the case of the ketana? Ibemiyun ha'amar Shmuel chadazimna. If what you're saying is that we're talking about a case of miyun, so we've already learned that. Shmuel already taught that. And ibeget ha'amar Shmuel debaya. And Shmuel says that if we're talking about a get, so then he says that in fact by a get, you do need to wait 3 months. So how then do we understand Shmuel? Let's first finish out his Mari Makomos. Here, Amar Shmuel, miyanabo eina tzricha lahamtin shlosha chodashim, that by miyun there's no need to wait 3 months. But nasan la get tzricha lahamtin shlosha chodashim. So the Gemara has a kasha now. The statement of Shmuel 7 lines down on Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, the statement of Shmuel indicated that there's no need to be waiting for a Ktana who's a Yisrael. Yet Shmuel says elsewhere that by a get she does. Answers the Gemara, what's our case dealing with? Ella, our case is dealing with biznus, with a young girl, a young Jewish girl who was mizaneh. Biznus biktana lo shliach, and that is very uncommon practice for a young girl who's married, 12 years old, 11 years old, I should say. She's not yet 12. To be married and to be mizaneh at that age, that's not normal behavior, and therefore we're not gozer on that. Asks the Gemara, a third of the way down on Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, Gioras and Meshuchreres Teshchiach Behu Znus Ligzor. But if you have a giores, if you have someone who didn't grow up with Jewish values, and if you have someone who's meshuchreres, you have a shifcha, these women are not known for their moral compass. So says the Gemara, the shchiach behu znus, by them, znus is commonplace. So therefore, ligzor, we should have a gzera by them that they should have to wait 3 months. Why then does Shmuel say that the women, the giores meshuchreres gedola, that they don't have to wait 3 months? So answers the Gemara, Huda Amar Kereb Yosi. At least this shita of Shmuel has whom to rely upon in the world of the Tanoim. How so? Titania, the Brisa writes, Hagiyoras v'hashivuya v'hashivcha. If you have a woman who's converting, a woman who's been held captive, or a shivcha, a maidservant, sheniftu v'sheniskairu v'shenishtachru, who respectively were redeemed, converted, and freed. We have to wait 3 months because in those scenarios, we can't assume that they didn't have tashmish shamita. We have to assume that they did, so we have to wait 3 months. Rabbi Yossi mater le'aretz v'le'nasim miyad. Rabbi Yossi's mater even in that case, and that is where Shmuel is basing his shita. Amar Rabba, my time at Rabbi Yossi. Why is Rabbi Yossi so lenient in this case? Says the Gemara, because kasavar isha mizaneh, a woman, while granted being mizaneh is certainly an off the derech activity. However, there still is a little bit of planning in that she makes sure she doesn't conceive. So kasavar isha mizaneh mishameshes b'moch kadisha lo tisaber. She'll use some type of absorbent cloth so that during tashmish hamita, she won't be able to conceive. The garment will be placed inside of her body and it will absorb any of the zera, so she can't get pregnant. It's a birth control of yesteryear. Now we have IUDs, whatever the case may be, but still very dangerous. There are stories all the time. This just happened to one of my neighbors on an IUD right after having a baby, pregnant. So not everything is perfect, but in their system was even less perfect, but they would use a moch to prevent the likelihood of conceiving. I could understand a giores she's learning for her Gerus course. So she knows what's going on. She's minter nafsha kedei lahavchin bein zera shenizra b'kedusha vein zera shenizra shelo b'kedusha. When it comes to a giores, no problem. We can fairly assume that because she's planning to become a yid, so she's going to be careful not to get pregnant during that amount of time because she wants her children to be nizra b'kedusha. She wants to conceive when she's a yid. She doesn't want to conceive when she's a goy. And as well, shvuya. V'shivcha nami. If you have a shvuya, you have someone who's in captivity, and a shivcha maidservant deshami mimarahu minterei nafshayu. They know how to plan accordingly. They kind of know when they're getting out of prison. They know when they're being freed. So they'll also be careful to use a moch during tashmish hamita to prevent getting pregnant. Ela yotzes b'shein ve'ayin. But when it comes to an eved, we know there's a din in Chumash that the halacha in Chumash says that if you have an eved and they get injured, their tooth falls out or their eye falls out, they get injured, the halacha is that they go free. Now, unlike all the previous cases of the giores and the shivuyim and the shivcha, this person got injured on the spot and they go free right away. So if this is a shivcha who got injured, she didn't have planning time so that her tashmish hamita was b'moch. So says the Gemara, hechi mishkachasla. Maybe we should say that in that case, it's impossible to plan, and therefore we should assume that she has to wait 3 months. Says the Gemara, v'chitema, 2/3 of the way down, a little bit more, lamed hey amud aleph, as we head to the end of the parak. V'chitema kol dimimela moda Rabbi Yossi. If you want to say that anything like that, you're right. That anything when it comes to a shifcha who gets injured, that there we're just saying, okay, what can you do? Therefore, she has to wait 3 months. That's not true, because v'hatanya, a correction in the girsa here, it's a brisa, not a mishnah. Anusa umefuta tzricha lahamtin gimel chadashim de Rabbi Yehuda. Granted, Rabbi Yehuda's makbid that with a woman who was violated or seduced, she has to wait 3 months. Rabbi Yossi matir le'arsul nase miyad. So we see that Rabbi Yossi was matir even in a case where there was no prep time. Again, by a giora, she knew she was going to convert, so all of her tashmish hamita for the last 3 months will be b'moch. By a shivcha, she knows when she's being freed, so she has tashmish hamita b'moch. But when someone is going to be freed because of an injury, you can't plan for an injury. So therefore, we should assume that maybe she has to wait 3 months. Rabbi Yossi says no. Elamar Abaye. How then did she prevent conception? Says the Gemara, Isha mizane, when a woman would be intimate, she would not necessarily use a moch, but mishapeches shelotis aber. She knew there was a way to contort her body in a way where she was less likely to conceive, in a way that the zera would not flow toward the uterus, but the way it would flow away from the uterus. Fine. Says the Gemara, V'idach, if that's true, then why does Rabbi Yehuda hold what he holds? Why doesn't he hold that she can be misapeches? She can turn her body in a way where the zera is unlikely to generate pregnancy. Maybe she didn't do this particular positioning of her body in a way that was actually effective. Our Mishnah on the bottom of Lamed Gimel Amud Beis, which is the Mishnah we're working off of, actually has a different language. The end of that Mishnah on Lamed Gimel Amud Beis, if you look back, says V'imhayu kohanos nifsalu min hatruma. But the Meforshim on the Mishnah, some of the Meforshim changed that language to nifsalu min kehuna, which is very different. One is you can't eat this food. The other is you're done for. You're not allowed to marry a kohen. You're out. So that's actually the version of the Gemara of the Mishnah that we're learning here. It says the Gemara V'imhayu kohanos. Our Mishnah had said that if a woman, the case of our Mishnah was where two brothers married two sisters and they inadvertently switched wives right by the kiddushin. So then, if that one of those women was going to be shaykh to a kohen, she's no longer shaykh to a kohen. Now she's a zona technically. She slept with someone already, so case closed. Says the Gemara, kohanos in Yisraelis lo. It's true by a woman who's a bas kohen, fine, but what about a Yisraelis? Isn't it not true that a Yisraelis, she also can't marry a kohen if she's a zona, if she's had tashmish hamita? She should not be allowed at all. Fine. Says the Gemara, you're right. We're only talking about wives of Kohanim. Says the Gemara, what does that mean? Nishei Kohanim in, Nishei Yisraelim lo. That doesn't make sense. If they're wives, it's the same exact question. Why are you this strange formulation? He says, no, you misunderstood. But let's first finalize the question. Amar of Amram, Hamilsa Amar lan Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes had taught a particular halacha. Ve'in harinu le'ainen mimas nisen, and he brightened our eyes. He enlightened us. We learned it from this Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? Eishes Yisrael shenensa. if the wife of a Yisrael, Shenensa, was violated, Afal Pishim Muteres Labaila, yes, she can marry, she can be with her own husband after a rape, that's correct, but she's Psula L'Kahuna, a very, very complex halacha, that if a woman is violated, she cannot go back to her husband if he's a Kohen, but can if it's Yisrael. So Amar Rava, what? Yeah. It's halacha l'maisa, it's Ladino. Very difficult then to explain. In Svara, it's very, just emotionally, it's hard to explain. We can understand state and Shulchan Aruch, I understand that, but it's not simple. The Gemara says, how do we explain this Gemara? Amar Rava Hachi Kamar. Here is what the Gemara meant when it corrected to say Neshei Kohanim. Yimhayu Kohanos Nesuos LeYisrael, that if there was a Bas Kohen married to Israel, Nifsalu Minat Truma Debein Neshaihu, then if she was violated, then she cannot benefit from any of the Truma in her family's house, because normally what would happen is after a woman divorces, then she would be able to go back to her parents' house and benefit from whatever's going on in the house. That's not true in the case of Kohanos that are Nesuos to Israel who were violated. They're Nifsul Mina Truma Debei Neshaihu. They're not allowed to have any Truma even from their own family's home. Take a look at the last Rashi for more commentary. Hadron Alach Arba Achin Yiratzon. We should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. We're beginning now. Baruch Hashem, the fourth parak of Maseches Yevamos. Says the Gemara, we've been learning about this din, about making sure that we're careful not to marry a woman when she's within 3 months of a relationship with another person. What about as it relates to chalitza and yibum? So our Mishnah is going to discuss two cases. What if a man does chalitza without having waited for the 3 months and we find out she's pregnant? Or what happens if he does yibum and marries her and sleeps with her, not knowing that she might be pregnant because he didn't wait the requisite 3 months? These are huge nafkamim. What?
Kid's name is going to be the same regardless. Right, and he's
well, not by chalitza, but by the other case.
Right. So
yes, he's chayav a korban. Yeah, that's one thing. But the Mishnah will make it. What did you say?
The reason we were talking about the 90 days to make sure we know who the father is. In this case, the father doesn't matter because either way.
No, text. If you do chalitza, and it turns out she had a baby, your chalitza wasn't anything.
Okay, so.
Now, not such a big deal, right? What about the tzara? We're going to discuss that today because chalitza, tzara, those two are dependent. And let's say that she taka does have a baby, and it wasn't the case of chalitza. You actually married her. Whose kid is that? First of all, is the kid a mamzer? Right, the kid's not a mamzer because, well, you slept with him. He's dead, but it's very strange. It's her kid. It's not mamzer's. But the case, what David pointed out, will be mentioned by the Mishnah, which is that you slept with someone who you're not allowed to sleep with. You slept with your brother's wife because it wasn't the case of yibum. Only when there's a heter of yibum are you allowed to sleep with her. Otherwise, nothing. And you slept with her without waiting 3 months. Turns out she was pregnant. What?
I still don't know if Sarah gets.
Doesn't matter, even if he dies. No, but also, you know what?
What?
That the Sarah is out of luck.
The opposite.
We'll discuss the tzara. The tzara is complicated. That's going to be the whole Gemara's focus, is on machlokas Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish about how we view the tzara. That's going to be a big part of today's discussion. But
does it get into a discussion about, let's say he was in the hospital for 3 months, so there's no possibility that it's his child?
Our Gemara doesn't make that distinction, and halachically speaking, we don't do that. We assume that couples within and whatever the frame of whatever the time frame is, certainly 3 months. It's a time frame where conception is very possible. Gemara is going to discuss your case. Exactly right. Gemara is going to discuss. So let's go through the two parts of our Mishnah. One case is chalitza. One case is chalitza with a woman whom you did not wait the proper 3 months for, and the other case is where you did yibum. So case number one, a person does chalitza. They go to bezdin, spitting, shoe, the whole thing. Great. The nimtes meuberes v'yolda, and she actually has a child. This is problematic. And says the Gemara, we first have to see if the child is going to survive. First of all, bisman she'avlad shel kayama, if the child is going to survive, which typically in halacha we assume is 30 days. That's why we don't do the mitzvah of pidyon haben until that time, because it has to be a bar kayama. No din like that by bris milah, obviously, pasuk and chumash. But nevertheless, if the child lives, then chalitza was not done, and therefore, hu muter bekrovo seha v'hi muteres bekrova v'lo pasla minat kahuna. Because had chalitza been done, she would have been puzzled for kahuna. But the chalitza wasn't a chalitza. She had a kid. She had a kid. So in case number one, she actually gave birth, but we don't consider that child the child of her child until he's lived for 30 days. Okay, so then this child lived for 30 days and no problem, your chalitza wasn't a chalitza. Ein havlad shel kayama, but if you did chalitza to this woman, let's say right after her husband died, let's just say by month number 1, and the child dies before day 30, Rahman al-Islam. So then your chalitza was a chalitza, and now therefore, hu asur b'krovo se'av, he asur b'krova b'pasla min hakahuna. Now you've done chalitza, ben grusha ben chalutza, you're not allowed to marry a Kohen. The woman's not allowed to marry a Kohen. Next case. Let's say that you don't do chalitza to this woman, you marry this woman. You do yibum, chuppah, kiddushin, the whole 9 yards. You're married now. And turns out she's actually pregnant and she has a child. Same chakira as before. Did the child survive or not? Bisman shehavlad shel kayama. If in fact the child is born, that means that there was no mitzvah of yibum. Yotzi, you have to get divorced because you're married to Eishes Ach, b'chayavin b'korban, because you slept with a woman who you should not have slept with, and that's very halachically problematic, obviously. That's if the baby survived. But v'im ein vlad shel kayama, if the baby dies, you're allowed to stay married because it's yibum. That would be a problem too. Yeah. Was that a halachic question or just a?
It's more than thinking out loud.
Okay. All right. Okay.
No,
It's more of what's in the news.
I didn't hear what he said.
I mean,
We're only-
it should be said differently. If the child's born and then something, he dies after being born.
That is what we're talking about. Up until day 30. That is exactly right.
And
because
from day 31.
Day 31, then that means that she was actually never Yevama, because Yibum only applies when she has no kids. So the distinction is up to 30 days. Doesn't matter how he dies. It just
once. No, you're talking like a year. You've been married for a year at this point.
no.
No, I mean, the first thing-
8 months or whatever.
Could be it could be 6 months, 7 months, yeah, whatever. The Gemara is going to discuss a little bit of that. Like we don't know whose kid it is. So what if you're born at 7 months? Is that a suffix rishon, suffix? We'll discuss that in the Mishnah too.
Ooh.
Yeah, that could be very confusing.
Yeah.
Although there's no real nafkamina in regards to whose child it is, but what's the difference? It'll have impact for Yibum for like the wives, brothers, like for those convoluted
You're
cases.
still holding that you wait 3 months though, after.
You still have to wait 3 months, correct?
Right, so you're just assuming that you didn't know you were pregnant after 3 months, now magically.
Yeah, but then what did they know? They didn't have.
Right,
I'm saying it's
understood.
just what it is. So
Right,
we
you're married on day 91.
correct. But their halacha would be the determining factor. We would assume if it's not hukra ubra, if she's not showing at that point,
Right.
so then we assume that's the halachic parameter. What?
Wait another 2 weeks.
He should have waited. He should have waited because now this guy is chayav a korban.
You would know who the baby was.
You'd assume you don't even know.
No, if you're waiting those 3 months.
I mean, there are people who just don't show when they're pregnant, not for a long
Right.
time. So
So we shouldn't show, find out she's pregnant, but you now know, you don't, how you know.
correct, you don't know, but we assume in halachic terms that if they married on day 91 and they were together that night, and then she had a baby, let's say 7 months
You
later,
assume it's that one.
you can assume it's his kid. It's the new husband's kid. Now the Mishnah continues. V'im ein vlad shel kayama yekayim. Again, we learned this then that if he marries the Yevama and the child does not survive, the child does not live 30 days, then he can stay married to her. Now, remember that he did something wrong here. This is not l'chatchila. This is all not right. He should not have married this woman. He should not have done chalitza to this woman until the 90-day mark. Now, end of the Mishnah, Safek ben Tisha l'rishon, Safek ben Sheva la'achron, Yotzi, ve'avlad kosher v'chayavin ba'asham talui. What happens if the baby is born and we don't know who the father is because of the timing of the birth? Now, obviously, there's not going to be clarity here because she potentially slept with her husband the day before he died, potentially. And she slept with her new husband once they were married within 3 months. So Safek ben Tisha l'rishon, ben Sheva la'achron, they don't know how long the gestational period was. They don't know. We can go down to the week, down to the day. If you look at an ultrasound, it'll say 34 weeks and 2 days. We're very nuanced in our process. We could measure the femur bone and approximate the age of the gestational child. We're very, very detailed. They didn't have that. So when this child was born, Safek ben Tisha l'rishon, maybe he's a 9-month-old baby through gestation, 9 months of gestation, and he belongs to the first husband. And Safek ben Shiva la'achron, he might also be a 7-month-old and belong to the new husband. So what do we do in this case when you're unsure? Oh, he's got my eyes, but you're brothers, so it doesn't matter if he has your eyes. So it says the Gemara, it says the Mishnah, you need to get divorced because that's a suffix d'oraisa. We don't know if Yibum applied, and therefore we don't know if you're allowed to marry this person. The Havlad Kasher, we don't consider the child to be problematic. The Chayavin ba'asham talawi, and asham talawi is brought when you've done something and you're not exactly sure what the status was of your behavior. We don't know if you've made an error. You do need to get divorced, but because you slept with her, you have to bring a korban. End of Mishnah. Yeah, Itmar. I mean, we've had other cases of poor kid that's worse than this, but the Gemara says as it opens, Lamed Hey Amud Bey is at the Gemara about 10, 12 lines down. Itmar, we're going to see now, Itmar is always a word that introduces an Amorei conversation. So here, two Amoreim are going to be talking about one case, and they're going to keep using our Mishnah as fodder to argue with one another. Itmar, Hacholetz Lemeuberes v'hipila. This was the case that Zayd was talking about, well, part of it at least. Hacholetz Lemeuberes, a person does chalitza to a woman that he knows is pregnant, and then vihipila, and then she miscarried. This is a little bit of a different case in our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, you didn't know. Here, you do know. You're just breaking the rules. You know it's not your kid. You know that already. You marry her, she's got a belly. You marry her, you know it's not your kid, and then the baby is hipila. Now here, we're not saying that he did anything necessarily. We don't. They could be at the third month, fourth month. It doesn't matter. Fine. And then the baby miscarries. Rahman al-Islam. Rav Yochanan Amar, Eina tzricha chalitza min ha'achin. No chalitza is going to be needed in such a case. Reish Lakish Amar tzricha chalitza min ha'achin. That yes, the brothers do need to do chalitza. Let's analyze. Says the Gemara, Rav Yochanan Amar ein tzarich chalitza min ha'achin. Why doesn't she need chalitza? Because chalitzas meuberes shma chalitza. The case that was presented as the Gemara opened was a case of chalitza, and therefore, because you did chalitza, a chalitza to a woman who's pregnant counts. See, this is really where the question is. She's pregnant. We don't know if this child is going to survive. So if you do chalitza, does that actually take effect? Yes or no? I could argue both ways. She's pregnant. It's a pretty bad idea to assume that chalitza works at all. So then, therefore, if the chalitza is not a chalitza, then we need chalitza after the baby dies. And if the chalitza is a chalitza, then you don't. So Rabbi Yochanan says, "Ein tzar chalitza min ha'achin." If in fact the baby dies, why is it that we don't need chalitza for the brothers after the death of the baby? Because even though you didn't know the outcome, chalitzas meuberes shma chalitza, ubias meuberes shma bia. That if in fact you do chalitza or yibum under these circumstances, so then the din is that still the mechanics of that activity worked. The chalitza, the mechanics worked. And if the baby ends up, it's kind of like working backwards though, because the baby doesn't die till later. So if the baby dies, let's say he does the chalitza in January, and then the baby dies, Rahman al-Islam, in March. So seemingly it's out of sequence, but Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it still works. Reish Lakish Amar, about a quarter of the way down, Reish Lakish says, tzricha chalitza min ha'achin, that when Rahman al-Islam, the baby does die, so then the brothers, after the death of that baby, need to do chalitza, because chalitzas meuberes lo shma chalitza, ubias meuberes lo shma bia. It's not going to work. You can't do chalitza when someone's pregnant. Doesn't that sound so reasonable? She's pregnant. The only time that Yibum ever applies is when a woman doesn't have a child. She's pregnant. So, okay, you're not within the 3 months. You don't need to be in the 3 months. She's pregnant. So what do we say? Machlokas. And Rav Yochanan says that you're still allowed to do chalitza, not so much that you're allowed to, but it still counts. Masha'en Ken Reish Lakish says it does not. B'mai kamiflage. What is it that the two of them are arguing about in this case? So Ibai say makrav, Ibai say masvara. The Gemara presents two answers. One is that they're arguing about psukim, and the other is that they're arguing about logic, and seemingly out of order. Ibai say masvara. Here is the approach as to the logic side of things. Rabbi Yochanan Savar. Rabbi Yochanan gives a theoretical scenario. Im yavu Eliyahu b'yomar daha di'abra mapule mapala milav bas chalitza v'yibumim. Let's say you had a crystal ball. Eliyahu Hanavi shows up at your doorstep and he says, "You who are thinking about doing chalitza with this woman, I'm just telling you, she's going to miscarry." So says Rabbi Yochanan, if you know she's going to miscarry, then why wouldn't chalitza work? Hashta nami tigli milsa lemafreya. We could now reverse the case. Baby died in March. Okay, so then the chalitza I did previously in January should count. It says Reish Lakish, what are you talking about? For Reish Lakish Amar, Tigli Milsa Lemafreya, Lo Rinan. What are you? It's out of order. She's pregnant. You can't do chalitza when she's pregnant. So we have a strong chasm between the two of them in regards to how we should be analyzing this case. Answer number one is that we just disagree in logic. Can you do chalitza before the death of the child and have it count? Yes or no? That's their machlokas. Halfway down, by same akra, but there's another way to analyze and to understand this machlokas, Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And it's based on the pasuk. Rav Yochanan savar uven ein lo amarachmana v'halesle. Rav Yochanan looks very narrowly. We don't care if she's pregnant because that doesn't mean that there's a baby. A baby is after delivery. Up until that time, doesn't matter. Right now, we're saying that she doesn't have a child, and that's true. In utero, there is a child, but not here on this side. We don't do a bris on the 8th day from conception. The baby has to have a leda first. So there's no leda. So it says Rav Yochanan, that's shot in the pasuk. Uven ein lo amarachmana. That's what the pasuk says. She doesn't have a child. But halesla, she's pregnant. She doesn't have a child yet. For Reish Lakish savar, when the pasuk says uven ein lo, what does that mean? Ayena love. We have to see. We have to see what's going to happen. You can't just assume that the baby is going to die. That's a crazy assumption. We'll ask that question a little bit later today as well. So this is the basic machlokas, Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. I'm going to review this machlokas because we need to understand it clearly to navigate the 1, 2, 3 questions that we are going to analyze. We'll probably wrap up to the top of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. We're actually going to go pretty far down. We'll stop almost halfway down on Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. That's actually where Rabbi Resnick stopped in his shiur. I just wanted to make sure we're gonna make it here. So what's the machlokas? The case was where someone did chalitza to a pregnant woman. The machlokas of Yochanan Reish Lakish is as to whether or not that chalitza halachically actually worked. Rav Yochanan was of the opinion is that even though she's pregnant and even though it's not normal, the chalitza technically still works. Just like we said, if there's an isur lav between a man and woman, technically the marriage still works. Halachically, the mechanics work, but it's usur. So year 2, it should not be done, but the chalitza actually works. Reish Lakish says, what are you talking about? It's out of sequence. How can you tell me that a woman that's pregnant can get chalitza? If she might have a baby. So that's their machlokas. So then here, 4 lines before the wide lines on Lamed Hey and Beis, the Gemara poses a question. And we'll see 2 versions of this question. Eisvei Rav Yochanan and the Reish Lakish. Rav Yochanan says to Reish Lakish, didn't you learn our Mishnah? Our Mishnah at the beginning of this parak on Lamed Hey and Beis, what's the kasha? The Mishnah says, Ein havlad shel kayam. If the baby doesn't survive, we said, Hu asher b'krovo seah, he asher b'krova upasla mina kahuna. We said that if the baby doesn't survive, and there had been tashmish amita, so we said this woman is psula. She did something wrong. So says the Gemara, sorry, that's not even that case. What's the language of the Mishnah? Ein havlad shel kayam. It's in the first case of chalitza. So in the case of chalitza, they did not have tashmish amita, but we say that she is now psula to a kohen. Now, says Rav Yochanan, bishlama ledidi, my ashita makes more sense. Where I say that really, even though she was pregnant, the chalitza still actually works. Because the chalitza works, she's now a chalutza, and therefore she cannot marry a kohen. That makes sense. But according to you, who says that chalitzas me'uberes doesn't count, you could sit there and do chalitza all day. If she's pregnant, it doesn't work. So then, if you say lo shma chalitza, amai pasta min hakehuna, what's the psul of a woman making her usher to a kohen? It's that she's a chalutza. But if you're saying when she's pregnant, the chalitza doesn't work, why is she psula to a kohen? Bam kasha from Rav Yochanan on Reish Lakish from our Mishnah. Amar le Reish Lakish is like, relax. It's not a big deal. Amar le midrabanan l'chumra ba'alma. No, I'm just saying it's a chumra. It's a chumra, but really, that's not the case. Really, the chalitza doesn't work. We're makbed. We create a chumrah on her because this is not normal behavior. Fine. Some reverse this question. Esvei Reish Lakish, the Rav Yochanan. It wasn't Rav Yochanan, it's Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish was asking a question. What was his question? Our Mishnah says, Ein havlad shel kayama, that if the baby doesn't survive, hu asur b'krova savi, asur b'krova v'psalam min hakehuna. We said in our Mishnah that if a man does chalitza when a woman, it turns out to be pregnant, and she has a child, and the child doesn't survive, we said that the woman is considered a chalutza. Bishlama l'didi, says Reish Lakish 4 lines into the wide lines. I understand my perspective. Amina, I say chalitzas meuberes lo shma chalitza haynu diktani put salin akuna l'chumra, that I have my chumra, that really in this case, technically midoraisa, she's not a chalutza, but I have a chumra on her that she does. V'lo katani, what is not listed? That she doesn't need chalitza. But according to you, Rav Yochanan, the Mishnah should have said, and she doesn't need chalitza from her brothers, because the chalitza works. According to Rabbi Yochanan, chalitzas me'uberes is shma chalitza. That if you say that a man does chalitza to a woman who's pregnant, it functionally works. The chalitza works. If that's true, then even when the baby dies, she shouldn't have to do chalitza to her brothers. Why didn't it say that in the Mishnah? So says the Gemara, Amar Le, Rabbi Yochanan responds to Reish Lakish, Inachanami, you're absolutely right. And the only reason it's not there is because the idea of Tana Reisha lo pasla, Tana Seifa pasla, it was only to have some type of symmetry within the Mishnayos, but you're absolutely right. But it's not a strong kasha. I mean, here's the second question the Gemara asked 2/3 of the way down. Eisvei Rav Yochanan the Reish Lakish. Rav Yochanan says to Reish Lakish as follows: Ein havlad shel kayama yikayim. That if the child doesn't survive yikayim, they're allowed to stay married. This was talking about the second case in our Mishnah when he was kones es. What was the case? Kones es yivimto. So he married her, and it turned out she was pregnant. So there we said that if the child doesn't survive, they can stay married because that means she was childless, and then there was a din of yibum. So says the Gemara, Rav Yochanan says to Reish Lakish, Bishlam aladidi de amina chalitzas meuberesh shma chalitza. I understand my shita. I hold that the chalitza works even when she's pregnant. Ubias meuberesh shma bia. And when he decided to do yibum and sleep with her, they did yibum and they got married. That actually works. Mishum hachik tani yikayim. Therefore, I'm already married. I was married the day that we got married while you were still pregnant. What's the difference? But you, Reish Lakish, you hold down that any activity that happens while she's pregnant is a zero. Then it shouldn't say Yekayim that you're just married. It should say Yachzor v'yivol v'Yekayim baile. They have to remarry. They have to remarry. Granted, Chayav a korban for whatever happened while she was pregnant, but you have to remarry. Says the Gemara, you're right. You're right. My Yekayim. What does it mean when the Mishnah says Yekayim? It means Yachzor v'yivol v'Yekayim. Delo sagi, delo sagi. A little bit of some additional words here in the Gemara. Delo sagi b'lav. Of course, you have to remarry. He agrees with that. Reish Lakish. Ikadamre. Some say this question was asked in the other way. The question was asked like this: Eisvei Reish Lakish to Rav Yochanan. Reish Lakish says to Rav Yochanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Ein havlad shel kayama yakayim. We learned in our Mishnah that if the child, Rahman al-Islam, doesn't survive, and the husband had done yibum while she was pregnant, so we say they stay married. Bishlamad ledidi, says Reish Lakish, my shita makes sense. De'amina chalitzas meuberes lo shma chalitza ubias meuberes lo shma bia. According to my shita, that chalitza or yibum during pregnancy doesn't work. Hainu dekatani yakayim. That's why the Mishnah says that they can stay married, which means yachzor v'yivol v'yakayim. Delav sagi, delo sagi v'lav hachi. Of course, you need to do that in this case. You need to remarry. Ela ledidach. But according to you, Rav Yochanan, what should the Mishnah have said? Ratza yotzi, ratza yikayimi baile. That he has a choice at this point to stay married to her. Why didn't it say that? Says the Gemara, responding for Rav Yochanan, in hachanami, that is a possibility. And I did the Tana Resha yotzi, Tana nami seifa yikayim. Again, for just having symmetry in the Mishnayos, the languages were the same, but really we have no riots from our Mishnah one way or the other to support either Rav Yochanan or Reish Lakish. Everyone has strong arguments one way or the other. Let's learn this last little sugya because we have time. It'll make tomorrow still easier. Let's continue. We're about 15 lines or so, a little bit less, 12 lines from the bottom. Meisvei. A question from our Mishnah. What did we see in our Mishnah? Hakones yesivim tovanim tseis meuberes. That if a man does yibum while the woman is pregnant, this is not our Mishnah, this is a brisa. Harezu lo tinase tzarasa. You cannot then marry the tzara. Shema yehe vlad ben kayama. Lest the child actually stay alive. Says the Gemara, that's backwards logic. Adarabba. Only ki have havlad ben kayama. What was the case? Shema yehe havlad ben kayama. Says the Gemara, ki have havlad ben kayama miftarat tzarasa. That had the child been alive, well, then there's no tzara, there's no anything, there's no yibum. So she should be totally patur in that case. Therefore, says the Gemara, you're right. What was the case? Elaima, the case must be Shema lo yehe havlad ben kayama. It must be that we're concerned that the child won't be alive. And if the child doesn't survive those first 30 days, then there was a din of yibum, and then she is the tzara of the Yevama. So says the Gemara, that's the appropriate way to understand that brisa. But then our question comes in. If you want to say like Rav Yochanan, that Tashmish Amita, knowing that she's pregnant, counts, so then then why then would we not allow for the tzara to get married? Then the yibum was already done. Let it be. Says the Gemara, then she should be, the tzara should be totally fine. She should be free to go. Amar Abaye, Bibia Kule Alma Lo Pli Depatra. Here the Gemara starts to go back on our original machlokas, and the Gemara says everyone agrees that when it comes to Tashmish Amita that there is no machlokas, that Bia is de lo patra. That will not exempt the tzara. Ki pligi b'chalitza. The only machlokas is in regards to chalitza, but not in regards to marriage. Only in regards to chalitza. Rabbi Yochanan savar. Rabbi Yochanan's of the opinion chalitzas meuberes shma chalitza and bia meuberes lo shma bia. We only believe that chalitza is functional during pregnancy, and certainly yibum is not. Reish Lakish savar bias meuberes lo shma bia v'chalitzas meuberes lo shma chalitza. Neither of them work. Says the Gemara, that doesn't make any sense. Amar le Rav Manav Shach. One way or the other, you cannot argue that, like Rav Yochanan is trying to argue over here, that only some of it works, that just chalitza works, but not tash mishamita. I bias meuberes shma bia. If you want to say that tash mishamita works, then chalitzas meuberes shma chalitza. They are two peas in a pod. You cannot separate them. If one works, then the other works. And the reverse is true too. Then chalitzas nami lo shma chalitza. You can't have it both ways. And the way we tried to explain Rav Yochanan in this case was that he believed that chalitza worked and bia didn't work when a woman is pregnant. That can't be, because what do we hold? Top of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. We're going to go almost halfway down. What do we learn? Anyone who has a din in yibum also can certainly do chalitza. So says the Gemara, how then do we understand this brisa, the Mesve, the brisa that speaks about the tzara? Says the Gemara, El Amar Rava Hachi Kamar. Here's Rava's answer. Then we're going to see a brisa that supports it, and then we'll wrap it up. Hakones, what does the brisa say? 3 lines down, Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. Hakones yivimto v'nimtzeis meuberes. A man who does yibum with his pregnant sister-in-law. Hareizu lo tinase tzara. So shemei hevlad ben kayama. Maybe the child will survive. Ubias meuberes lo shma bia. And the tash mishamita really didn't count. V'chalitas meuberes lo shma chalitza. And the chalitza didn't count. V'havlad eino poter ad she'yetze lavir olam. And until he's born, we don't know what's going on. So nothing. It's a waiting game. That's what Rava says. And we have a brisa that supports Rava's new understanding of our Gemara. Tanya Kavase de Rava. The brisa says, almost word for word, a man who does yibum and he finds that his wife is pregnant, so the woman cannot marry, the tzara cannot marry during this time. Shema yehe vlad ben kayama, maybe he'll survive, maybe he won't. And whatever happens, that we don't care. Yibum and chalitza don't help. They don't help the tzara. The only thing that helps the tzara is the birth of the child. Says the Gemara, the Gemara says that it has to be that he's born. Taima, why do we say that? The Shema Yehe Vlad ben Kayamahu. Lo have Vlad ben Kayama, but had he not survived, Miftar Tzarasa, she should be pater. This is a very strong argument for Rav Yochanan, so much so, Lema Tabit to Yuf to the Reish Lakish. Maybe this then would reject the Shita of Reish Lakish. Amar lach Reish Lakish, nope, I don't agree with you. My shita can still stand. Hachik tani. Here's the right way to learn this brisa. Hakonis yivim tov v'nimtzeis meuberes. A man who does yibum and finds his sister-in-law to be pregnant, his brother's wife to be pregnant, harezu lo tinasei tzarasa. You cannot marry the tzara. Why? Shema lo yehei havlad ben kayama v'chalitzas meuberes lo shma chalitza ubias meuberes lo shma bia. Because we have no way of testing anything. Reish Lakish says at this time, from the time that they marry until the time that the child is born and lives for 30 days, nothing can happen. Even Reish Lakish would agree to that. V'im tomar halach achar rov nashim v'rov nashim vlad me'al yoyal. Done. Great question. We have statistics. We know, and even then, that most women who are pregnant have healthy births. And if that's true, why would we assume then that any yibum should be shayach here? It's most likely that the child is going to survive. Says the Gemara, it doesn't matter what the statistics are. Vlad ein poter ad sheyetze la'avir ha'olam. Until the kid is born, nothing else matters. And that is how we understand that last brisa. We're going to stop right here. We'll pick up in the middle of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph tomorrow night with Daf Lamed Vav. Wishing you all a beautiful night.